Former Seattle TV reporter, now independent journalist Brandi Kruse is here to talk about this video of Jonathon Choe. Actually, we got two videos we're going to show. And Jonathon was going to join us, but he had to cancel, so he's going to be on next week. And he's going to talk about getting fired from Como, which is a whole nother to-do, which we're going to discuss. But Brandi, tee this up for us. What are we about to watch here?
Sure. So I know eventually, we're going to discuss this kind of effort from Democratic leaders to try to make sense of some of these more conservative or conservative-friendly independent outlets that are popping up. And this is what really launched my interest in this story that I ended up doing. So this is in September. Jonathon Choe had, he works for Discovery Institute. He's doing stories on homelessness. And he was the only reporter in Seattle covering this issue in the Chinatown International District, where the government was trying to force this big homelessness megaplex on this community without their input. Community found out, they were outraged. So Jonathon Choe, this is in September of last year, he goes to this press conference with the King County executive, tries to ask him about this, and this is what ensues.
Okay, let's watch it.
Executive Constantine, I have a couple of questions related to public safety. So basically,
Sorry, we'll take any other questions offline. Thank you.
Follow up with you.
Mr. Constantine, I'm
I'll follow up with
asking
you.
a question about the Chinatown International District. Why are you ignoring me? The vast majority of Chinatown had a rally in Hinghe Park this past week and accused you of being racist against the Asian American community. Would you put a temporary moratorium on this project?
I'm glad to have Leo come talk to you about this.
How about you? When are you going to face the Chinatown community?
I'm in the Chinatown community continuously, but
So why not put a
You're-
moratorium on
here's
this
the problem.
before public input?
you're not actually a journalist. You were fired for promoting the Proud Boys. So we talk with reporters like those in the room, and we're not.
So
gonna-
you're not talking
we're not
to me
gonna do
anymore
that.
and accuse me of promoting the Proud Boys. You're an elected official. Why not put a moratorium on this project and get public input? Your office is not responding to me.
No,
That's the problem.
Because we are answering journalists' questions.
Yeah, I'm a journalist. I just want to let you know that. I'm a
You are
senior
not
fellow.
You are not with a media outlet that is.
I am. It's called
our focus.
fixhomelessness.org.
Oh, man, dude, I have so many thoughts on that. Why don't you just tell me, though, what you thought when you first saw it?
So when I first saw that, obviously there's a couple things. And for people who don't know the background, Jonathon Choe got fired from Como TV because he covered a Proud Boys rally in Olympia. And some people, he put out this video, which it showed like basically a montage of the rally, and they had some music playing at the rally, and he had put it underneath it. And some people thought it looked like propaganda for the Proud Boys. Seattle's Twitterers got on and called Como, and then they fired him, right? So, there's a couple things that stick out to me. One is he's asking about a legitimate news story. And you see Dow Constantine start to maybe answer, the King County executive, and then his female staffer comes in and pulls him away. And, Jonathon pursues him out in the hallway. And I think there's two key things that are said that are really disturbing. One, King County executive Dow Constantine, who wants to be the governor someday, says, "You're not a journalist." As if that he's the one who gets to decide.
Yeah.
And then
because he was fired from Como.
Right.
Yeah.
And so he gets to decide, well, you're not a real journalist.
Mhm.
So then he flees down this private elevator with his security guards. And you hear, I don't know if you could make it out, the female staffer who works on the executive's communications team says, to Jonathon, reach out to our office. And he says, but you're not responding to my request. That's why I'm here, essentially. She's like, well, you're not a member of the media that is our focus, which is very interesting. So she's basically saying, like, we have journalists who we're willing to work with, and you're not one of them. And I remember being just livid. And my coverage of this at the time, and I know you're going to play a second video, my coverage of this around the time was really focused around two things: the behavior of the executive for not answering questions about a legitimate news story and then throwing a fit, but also the mainstream media didn't have Jonathon's back at all. They didn't say anything or seem to have any problem with him being treated this way by a politician.
Do you think, Brandi, it's because of just, I don't know. Well, I'm curious. The sort of idea that the media is the big box brands. Do you think the Seattle journalists feel that way? Was that your experience, that maybe they agree with Dow Constantine and his people on that? And or do you think they just don't want to touch Jonathon because of this whole Proud Boys, like he's a racist or something thing? White
Yeah,
supremacist.
the Asian journalist is a super
Yeah.
white supremacist. There's a couple things that people should know. So in the room that day, this was a press conference that was on a public safety issue. It wasn't the one Jonathon was asking about. But as you know, Allison, that's really normal. If you have a press conference, you're bound to be asked about all measure of things. What's really interesting is there were only two other journalists in the room that day for the press conference. Both of them were independent journalists. One of them was Erica Barnett. She runs a progressive blog called Publicola. The other one was Omari Salisbury, who runs Converge Media, which is sort of like news coverage for the Black community. So both of them, certainly lean left, but they're both independent journalists with a variety of funding sources. So what really struck me is that here they're saying Jonathon Choe is not a journalist, presumably because of his connection also to, he works for a think tank, which is a conservative think tank. But I didn't see how that was any different than the independent outlets that were in the room that also, they have very clear liberal biases and get funding from a variety of sources as well.
Mm-hmm. I don't remember Dow getting very many hard questions. And frankly, mea culpa, like I didn't give him a lot of hard questions either, because I guess I'm watching these videos. I'm like, oh, I can't believe I ever thought these people were like just normal and had our best interests at heart all the time. Like they never deserved any hard questions, or I didn't even have any hard questions for them. I think I was probably just as brainwashed in a lot of ways, just because Seattle is such a homogenous environment, I think, ideologically. And so it's very easy to get sucked into a lot of that stuff and to feel like, I don't know, like I'd go to like the environmental press conferences and I'd always take the politicians line like this is just to help the environment, and never really questioning, well, does it really help the environment? I mean, and until towards the end of my career. And then when I started realizing that there were a lot of other complications and questions that needed to come to table, and my bosses really weren't giving me the opportunity to explore those because I just didn't have the time, then I was like, I gotta quit. I mean, that ultimately ended my career. But I look at Dow and I'm like, man, I mean, I just don't think that he's used to getting questions like Jonathon was throwing at him. And it's like unnerving. They throw these press conferences, not really as press conferences, they're theater opportunities for them to perform for the public. That's the way I look at it. And then when you're ruining their performance and they don't like it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I will say, when I was at Fox 13, I feel like I was pretty hard on politicians, but I was a political reporter.
You were.
And
yeah.
Dow said something to me once that was really eye-opening. And I went back and tried to get people at Fox 13 to see if they could dig up raw video of it, because I wanted proof that it had happened. I sat down with Dow Constantine while I was still with Fox 13 for an in-depth interview while he was running for his fourth term. And we already had a kind of contentious relationship because I'd been hard on him. And when apparently someone's hard on him, he thinks that they're mean, So he sat down with me, and he jokes with me. He goes, I'm like, oh, good to see you, Dow. And before we started, and he said, you're mean. You're mean to me. And I said, I'm not mean to you. The rest of the media is just soft on you. And he goes, yeah, that's probably true. So even he acknowledged it when he didn't think, the conversation was, on the record, that he knew the rest of the media was soft on him, and he had become accustomed to that.
Mm-hmm. No, I totally agree. I mean, the reason that you have such a dedicated following right now, and we should just give a shout out where people can watch your stuff or listen to your stuff, because you have your independent work now. Why don't you just tell everybody where they should go, especially if you're in the Pacific Northwest and you're interested in an alternative voice?
Yeah, so Undivided airs 3 days a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. The Wednesday episode is for subscribers only, and it's really about just sort of trying to look at things through a lens of common sense. I mean, if you feel like politically exhausted and homeless, I'm a moderate independent. It's probably a good podcast for you if you just want something that kind of cuts through the bullshit narrative in Seattle news. So you can consume it in two ways. I have a Patreon page, patreon.com/undivided, or I'm on Locals as well. Some people prefer Locals as a platform. It's brandikruse.locals.com.
Okay, great. Yeah. As I was saying, I think one of the reasons that you had people that followed you from Fox to Fox Q13, the Seattle it was an O&O, right? Not an affiliate. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was because you were one of the only people in Seattle that was really asking those questions. So I learned a lot from you. And I don't know. I don't quite understand what Dow's getting at when they say this, especially since it's like, okay, well, what's the good enough bar, I guess, besides the whole big box brand thing determining that you're in the media? Like, okay, well, what if I'm in the media, but I ate hot dogs yesterday and you're a vegetarian or something? Then you get to be like, you can't ask me questions. I mean, what's the bar? Like, even
Yeah.
if he got fired and he's still asking you questions, a public space. I mean, answer the question. He pays your salary too, just like everybody else. That's my problem with this video we're about to watch. Maybe you could tell us real fast what we're going to see.
Yeah, so the one you had just seen was in September. And then fast forward a month, and now the rest of the media has caught on to this story about the homelessness complex exclusively because Jonathon covered it. Jonathon was the only one covering it. And then all of a sudden, people are like, oh, wow, the Chinatown International District community is angry. So all the rest of the media has finally jumped onto the story, bandwagon situation. And the place that's going to house this homelessness complex agrees to give the media a tour. And they do it by invite only, RSVP only, specifically probably to keep Jonathon from coming. So what you're going to see is Jonathon attempting to show up for this media tour that he wasn't invited to. Again, keep in mind, he's the one who brought this entire story about this homelessness complex to the public, consciousness. And what you're about to see is a combination of the King County executive staff. You'll see a man wearing a mask. That's the communications director for the executive. Private security guards, and then workers for the Salvation Army that physically block Jonathon Choe from going into this media tour.
Okay, let's watch it.
24 hours notice. You had to be on the invite list 24 hours.
It's open to
You know the
members of the
policy?
media.
I've contacted you multiple times, Marta. You haven't returned any of my calls.
Katie Rogers with King County, and you haven't given her 24 hours notice. So we're
Fine,
gonna
you
move
don't need to
on.
make a scene about that.
So are you gonna? You haven't even sent me an email.
You're not a member of the media, Jonathan.
I'm not a member of the media, so I'm
Absolutely
not
correct.
being allowed to go into this tour.
Into the media tour? No, you're not.
Okay. What is it going to take for me to be able to go into this media tour?
You would have to work for a media organization, which you do not. You work for an advocacy group,
I work for Discovery
which
Institute.
is an advocacy group.
Well, we have a media wing called
I
FixHomelessness.org.
just have to stop and say, I don't know about you, but a lot of the people who follow my work would definitely call the vast majority of corporate news outlets advocacy organizations.
Yes.
So
Not a media wing.
Okay.
These are broadcast journalists, independent journalists. They work for media groups, not. Jonathan, you are not allowed in there.
I'm going to go I don't understand why I'm not being allowed to go
You're
in.
not a member of the media, Jonathan.
So I'm not being allowed to go in?
No.
Okay. I just wanted
Wow.
to make sure. So King County and Dow Constantine officially doesn't consider me
Don't
the
make a
media.
scene. Don't be defensive about this. Don't make a scene. about
I'm
this.
trying to go in and cover for the community what this is about.
Well, the media is here. You're not a member of the media.
Well,
That's the facts.
Can I ask you some questions then right now?
No, I'm not going to speak to you. We're declined to participate in your project.
Let me ask you something right now. Why are
No.
you building a shelter when most of the homeless
Jonathan,
are
we're not
rejecting
talking-
shelter?
We're not talking to you about this. You're welcome to send.
Why
in
not
any
have a
email.
moratorium?
Jonathan, we're not talking about you. We're not going to engage with you on this project.
Okay, well, I'm trying to represent the community, okay?
Jonathan, you're not a member of the media. This is a media tour. You were fired from being a journalist. You're no longer.
I'm a
member.
journalist, I'm a
You're
senior
absolutely not.
fellow, and a journalist. So
You work
who
for an
gets to
advocacy
determine that? You get to determine that?
I get to read what is written on the organization that you work for on
Yes.
their website, which is not a media organization.
So why is it that other city officials here talk to me then? Why do other
I can't
county
speak for
officials?
Anybody else or what anybody else does? I'm telling you, this is. A
So
media
you've
tour.
determined that?
I've determined that you work for the group that you've said that you work for,
Okay.
which is not a media group.
do you think Chase would come on my podcast or your podcast and explain all of this to us,
Yeah.
Brandi?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. And you hear it in there say you were fired from being.
Oh my
and then
gosh,
look at this
Antifa's
really quick.
here with
Do you see what's
umbrellas.
happening?
Yeah,
Just
they
hold
put
on.
umbrellas up.
So someone inside that tour put umbrellas up so
Dow
Jonathan couldn't
Constantine's
even
media
film
handlers are putting umbrellas in my face now.
from outside. And the executive's office to this day has not said who those people were that had the umbrellas.
Yeah, he said it was an Antifa. Antifa must have been there or something.
But inside when Jonathon
Yeah.
Choe couldn't get inside. So when this all happened, I was giving a speech over to the Washington State Farm Bureau in Wenatchee. And I had, been kind of out of pocket all evening, preparing for that speech and the event, and then going to the event. And I get back to my hotel room in Wenatchee, and I'm like, my phone just blew up with text messages from people sending me that video. And I was so mad. I was like shaking, and I did a Facebook Live because one of the things I was so mad about, I mean, by that point, the treatment of Jonathon from the King County Executive's office was not a surprise. But the fact that other members of the media were walking past Jonathon Choe into this event and didn't do anything, didn't say anything, didn't stand up for him was beyond the pale to me. And it was because they don't agree with him politically. That's all it was. If that had been a reporter for The Stranger, the city's alt-left weekly newspaper, other members of the media would have been like, hey, 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 like, he's a member of the media. So I did this Facebook Live, just absolutely losing it. But I also that night filed public disclosure requests. So I was like, I need to know, because you know this, Allison. I came to Seattle to be a journalist as a reporter 13 or 14 years ago. There has always been a robust, independent media landscape. It's always been part of Seattle, all the blogs and very niche coverage of things. And it has never been a problem. And then all of a sudden, I leave Fox to do my podcast. Jonathon gets fired from Como, works for Discovery Institute covering homelessness issues. The Center Square pops up. Change Washington pops up. Now there's independent media outlets in the last couple of years that are at least fair to conservatives. And all of a sudden, it's a problem. All of a sudden, there is this handling of these types of outlets that's different than the blatantly leftist outlets that have existed for decades. So I did a public disclosure request with the mayor's office, the King County Executive's office, and the governor's office, requesting any emails, documents, anything mentioning Jonathon Choe or Discovery Institute by name. And so that's why you and I are talking today, because I had recently got all of those requests back and ended up publishing this piece. It's pretty lengthy, but I would highly recommend reading it. Up on my Patreon and Locals, the headline, as you see there, "You're not actually a journalist. What happens when the government dictates media access?" And what I found through these public records was really a disturbing effort behind the scenes to silence this independent media dissent, to look at any of these independent outlets that had kind of a conservative bias or were hard on the governor, and to change policies and procedures around who gets press releases, who gets to attend press conferences, who gets access to politicians. And it was not surprising, but to read it in black and white, what was happening behind the scenes was really disappointing.
Yeah, in a second, I want to ask you about this email and how they're determining what questions are coming in good faith. Like what exactly does that mean? However, Brandi, sit tight for 1 second. I just want to tell everybody about one of my new sponsors for the month. I got to thank Noble Gold here. If you are considering protecting your IRA with gold and precious metals, and you want to support my work, I got a few videos this month sponsored by Noble Gold. So it'd be a great way to just give them a call and get some information about it and say that I sent you, and let them know that you're interested in learning more. You don't necessarily have to have all the answers right now. In fact, that's the whole point. They've got experts that's been in the business over 2 decades and would be happy to answer any and all questions you have about precious metals, your IRA, and your investments, and what it costs to transfer, to start up, to maintain, to cash out, all that good stuff. And another way, like I said, give them a call and tell them that Allison Morrow sent you. Great way to support my work. You go to morrowgold.com or call 877-646-5347. Of course, as usual with this read, have to tell you what the government tells me I should tell you, which is this is not financial advice. There's always a risk of investment and no guarantee of any kind. That's why you should ask questions, and Noble Gold will be happy to answer them. If you get in before the end of this month, you'll bag a free quarter-ounce American Gold Eagle coin with every qualified IRA of $50,000 or more. Again, 877-646-5347 or visit morrowgold.com. The links are in the video description, and once the live stream's over, they'll also be in the pinned comment. Again, it's something I hear from people every day now about like concerns over the housing market, over their investments, over the economy, and a lot of people are choosing to switch over to precious metals as a way just to secure investments instead of playing the stock market right now. And as I said about Noble Gold, they've been around over 2 decades. They've got 4.98 stars out of 5 with the Better Business Bureau, 4.9 out of 5 stars with Consumer Affairs. And again, like I said, they're generous enough to sponsor a few videos. So if you have been thinking even a little bit about making this move and you just got some questions, give them a call, go to the website, tell them Allison Morrow sent you, and we certainly appreciate it. Okay, so Brandi, let's go back to my question regarding this email, because what I think a lot of people who to sort of ascribe to this idea that, because I run into them, like I have people even who are like my buddies, former media folks, who still kind of have this idea to be a journalist. You have to have something. I don't know what it is. Like you have to have the Dumbo feather. I don't really know. They just still can't get it out of their brain that like anyone could do journalism. In my mind, I'm a free for all kind of person. I think anybody who's doing the act of journalism is a journalist. That's just the way I look at it. Whether you're paid, you're unpaid, whoever you work, that's just the way I look at it. It's the action that matters, not if you were born to the right family, you work for the right outlet, whoever it is. But that's just me.
Yeah.
So when you start judging intention, I think that's really problematic. Like, what's your intention? Is your intention to get the scoop for the public, or is your intention to make us look bad, or is your intention this? Like, a public official, in my opinion, should not be judging intention in order to give you information. I have a lot of concerns about that. I don't think they're even if that were a good idea, do you trust them to do that and judge intentions? I mean, how many politicians do you know have good intentions for the work they do? I mean, come on. So they say here that I've been ignoring WP. This is talking about Washington Policy Center's inquiries. This is another, like you said, conservative leaning think tank. In fact, Elizabeth Hovde, who they're talking about, has been on the channel a couple of times. And this is because, quote, I don't think they're legitimate or coming in good faith. And I just was curious what you think about that. I mean, you included in your article. It just what's going on there?
Yeah. So the whole concept of this article, really, it's and this is the email. I'm glad you picked this one out, because this is the email that made it about more than just Jonathon Choe. Because even though I just requested stuff that said his name or Discovery Institute, there are other things that came up that broadened the story a little bit. And really, what the story is about that what you just brought up: who gets to decide who the journalists are? Who gets to make that decision? Because I think it's fair to argue that it shouldn't be the government. And that's what's happening here. And so this is an email between members of Governor Jay Inslee's communications team, the deputy communications director to the communications director. And as you said, it's technically in response to a request that Elizabeth Hovde sent, where she was asking a very matter-of-fact question. She said that there was a difference between how labor union was interpreting Governor Jay Inslee's vaccine mandate and how the governor's office was sort of portraying it. And so she was just seeking clarity, which is what anyone who traffics in information should do. So very straightforward. And Jamie Falk, who's the governor's chief communications person, was responding to her. And Mike Falk took that email as an aside between him and Jamie, and he said this. He said, I think we need to nail down a policy for how we respond to WPC and others like Choe or Kruse or Center Square. I've been ignoring WPC's inquiries because I don't think they're legitimate or coming in good faith. I see you respond occasionally, and I'm sure that's why Hovde reached out to you. So I just want to be consistent. So what really struck me, because this is one of the first emails I saw when I got this public disclosure request back. And what struck me is there are at least 100 news outlets in Washington state, many of them independent, blogs, etc. But the ones he mentions here are all ones that have been critical of the governor. Me, Jonathon Choe, Washington Policy Center, and the Center Square, which is like an Associated Press style news service that focuses specifically on like taxes and spending. And so that struck me, and I immediately emailed Mike Falk about it. I didn't wait for the story. I emailed him about it because it was disturbing to me that they were judging, as you said, that if we were critical of the governor, then our request must not be in good faith. And that's a really dangerous position for a taxpayer-funded spokesperson for a politician. That's a dangerous position for them to take. And it's something that really sparked the entirety of the story. And again, I realize the story is very, very long, but it details these efforts behind the scenes to silence the most critical independent outlets in the state.
It's fascinating to me that, well, frankly, they put this in writing. Do you think it's just because they didn't think anybody was going to be asking for PDRs? I mean, I used to work for the government before they fired me, and you're bringing up Dow Constantine maybe running for governor. I think my old boss Hillary Franz is definitely going to be running for governor, so I can't wait to start doing some videos when her campaign starts. But because I think a lot of them set themselves up as media darlings, and I know, having worked in her department, Hillary Franz, that they set up these media opportunities where they're expecting, because we gave you access and we run in the same circles, I guess, that you're, I don't know, they just, I guess they just assume a certain nicety about it, like we're buddies here. And then I think they get kind of surprised by this stuff. And I think this is surprising to them. And I know that also, if they are in any way concerned that their communication is going to be made public, they never put it in emails, and they tell you to delete your emails and delete your Slack. I mean, I heard that all the time. And so for them to have just left this in an email, that's sloppy. And that to me says that sloppy, great for us, right? But for them, they would, if you're on a communications team for the government, that's sloppy. That's a rookie error. So I'm thinking they didn't think anyone's going to be following up on that.
Yeah. And I'll just tell you, Allison, I can stay on a little later. I know that I'd given you a hard out, but we can do a little extra time if you want.
Oh, good. I have a couple questions from locals.
Yeah. What's interesting is you can tell the offices that are better at hiding this stuff. Like when I did the PDR, I got virtually nothing from the Seattle mayor's office. And those are the people who are smart enough to talk about it on the phone and not put it in an email. But it was more than just the governor's office, the King County executive's office. It was interesting because Jonathon has been doing great coverage of the homelessness crisis, better than anyone. And he had been just fine with certain agencies in King County, certain departments that had been responding for months to his requests, no big deal, helping him get information on homeless camp sweeps. And then the executive's office intervened and directed, this is one of the emails I published, directed the other agencies basically to say, you don't have to treat these as media requests. Just respond by saying, we decline to participate in your project. So all of a sudden, Jonathon went from having agencies that were happy to help him to all the agencies responding with the boilerplate, we decline to participate in your project. Wow. And so it became this real concerted effort behind the scenes to not give him the information he was asking for, which was reasonable, fact-based questions. And ultimately that just hurts the public. And so again, this whole piece is really around the lens of, and I'm not saying I have an answer, and I don't offer an answer in the piece, but it's about trying to make people think about, okay, we have this rapidly changing media environment. You have legacy newsrooms that are declining by the day, and you have other entities that are popping up to try to fill the gap, like my podcast, like what you're doing, like what Jonathon Choe is doing. And we rely on a variety of funding sources. I'm an ambassador for something called Future 42, which is tied to a politically leaning organization. Would they not, am I now cut out after 13 years of being a journalist in the city? I have like 11 Edward R. Murrow Awards. Am I not a journalist because I'm now have a tie to a political think tank? So it's about this, how do we proceed from here? And who gets to decide moving forward, who's a journalist, who's not a journalist, who has access, who doesn't have access.
Right. And I don't think that this movement of ours, I guess, out of corporate news and starting our own whatever you call it, shows. That feels so like theatrical, but our own I don't know, audiences, I guess, our own I guess it is kind of a movement in a way. It's just being able to have sort of your work be independent of the strings of the corporate press. I just think it's bringing it out of them. Like, I think it was always there, this idea that I don't know, we come from sort of the same, we run the same circles, we go to the same cocktail parties, we went to the same colleges. I don't know what it is, but like, we're two fish in the sea together. And I think it's not necessarily, in other words, you and Jonathon are creating it. I think it already existed. You're just bringing it out, and it was always there. You're just exposing it. I don't know. It's fascinating. I do agree with you that it's really problematic. Bill Dozer is asking, is Brandi subject to producer approval? Yes, she is. And as you've noticed, the producer hasn't come in so far. That's awesome. So let's finish it up and let Brandi go on her merry way. Let's go over to locals real fast and just throw her some questions. And don't forget, Brandi's on locals, so you can go support her. Again, what is it, Brandi?
It's brandikruse.locals.com.
Okay. And then over at AllisonMorrow.locals.com, this is where you throw questions in ahead of time for interviews. $5 a month to be on my editorial board. Certainly appreciate it. What legal basis does King County have for deciding who is a journalist?
I mean, I don't know that they have any sort of legal standing to say you're not. And I don't know if there's some sort of, I think Discovery Institute, if they've got the funds to do it, should try to challenge what's happening. Because, I mean, we have the ultimate legal basis, which is the Constitution on our side and the First Amendment. And so I don't know if this were to go to a court, what the outcome would be. And to be clear, I don't think that press conferences can be free for alls. Because if you've got every single person who wants to come in with a cell phone or shout questions at the governor or something, I think it really hurts the ability of people who are there to gather and disseminate information to be able to do that. But then again, that's me saying you have to put the line somewhere. But where is the line? Who gets to decide it? Do you need some sort of independent organization in Washington State that comes down with rules like that? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is, but I don't think King County has a legal basis to be able to physically block Jonathon Choe from some of these events.
I guess in a perfect world, the city council meetings or the county commission meetings or whatever would be where everybody would allegedly have access. Unfortunately, they've turned into like you get 90 seconds and they don't respond, and they're just basically to make you feel better, but you don't really ever get any answers. And then why don't they have a public tour then? If they don't like that Jonathon's not with NBC or whatever, then why not have a day where the public gets to go tour the megaplex, and then you can ask your questions of the King County executive and get the answers, and have the day where the non-journalists get to go. I mean, why can't the taxpayers go see what they've paid for? I don't know. I wouldn't have a problem with that.
No, I mean, they should be able to. And I will note, because of Jonathon's reporting, that megaplex got shelved. So they want to say he's not a journalist. I mean, look how much attention he brought to the issue.
Yeah.
His journalism got other journalists interested. And now that megaplex isn't moving forward for now. And so that's a great thing. But that's what happens when good advocacy journalism, that's how effective it can be.
Okay, Ginger Ninja, just kind of the same question. In their opinion, I've been asking for a few years, how much of the media bias narrative do you feel is coordinated, and how much is hive mind mass psychosis? And the same question to you, Allison, your original hypothesis of it being mostly an isolated, like-minded group, has that changed?
Oh, 100% the hive mind. I don't think that there is a coordinated media bias. I don't think that they're sophisticated enough to have a coordinated media bias.
I think that gives I always like get flack for that, but I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's worse what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It's worse what I'm saying. Like, because that you can't fix stupid. You know what I mean? Like it's like very hard to wake people up. I know, as somebody who used to be one of the folks who just wasn't asking the questions that should have been asked, that's harder to fix, in my opinion.
It is. And also, so there's two things. I mean, you talk about local news and then you can talk about national news, and like local TV news, our old world is a lot different. And I'm not trying to disparage everyone who works in local TV. I think there are some good journalists, but you also have a lot of people who could just as easily be on Instagram. They just want to be seen. I mean, there are some local TV people in town who they post more selfies than they do anything journalistic or newsworthy. And so you have to ask yourself, like, that's someone who just wants to be on TV. And you also have a lot of young people who now they're, even like legacy stations like King 5, they're trying to hire like young and cheap, as cheap as they can get them. And they come into this city and they don't know anything about the background of the city. They don't know the right questions to ask. They have no institutional knowledge. And so really it's just a hive mind sort of, whatever the, executive producer wants to talk about today, go on your merry way and get your assignments. I will say there's also an element of, and I can say this is true for myself. People ask all the time, were you told you cannot report on this or you cannot say that? And I'll say, generally speaking, no, I had a lot of freedom. However, there is self-censorship. So there are stories that I wouldn't even pitch because I just knew like that wasn't going to be something that interested them. And I regret that, but I think that there's a little bit of, okay, I'm working in a corporate mainstream media environment. What kinds of stories are they going to be interested in me talking about? So there is a little self-censorship that happens even among members of the corporate media who might be independent thinkers.
I think the system too is set up that it kind of, if even if you're a well-meaning, heart's in the right place journalist, it can be very difficult to do a good job with the time and resources that you have. It's just it kind of keeps you brain dead because you're just trying to get the job done on time. And it's funny because when I worked in government, it was like you had to follow the process regardless if you ever got your product at the end of the day. It was just like the only thing that mattered was the process. And if you got nothing done, that was fine as long as you followed the process. In TV, it was like all we cared about was that you got it done. We didn't care if you juggled, the three stuffed animal bears while you're driving, and you had your grandma on the passenger seat reading you lullabies. Like no one cared as long as your TV story made it on air and was on time. So it's just very different. And I think, like I said, for me, like when I started realizing, wait a second, there are legitimate pushback to what I'm covering today, whether it's like plastic bag bans or anything else, and Clean Water Act, and I don't have time to do the research I need to present myself as an authority. I realized the system was not going to change. I tried to reformat my position and they thought I was kind of nuts. So I had to leave. There was no other option for me. So it's like once you start to wake up, you're like, I just don't, you had, I think, a unique position where they gave you a longer leash and you had more time to, not just to do your work, but also to present it. You had more time to like flush out ideas and whatnot. The average person gets 90 seconds. That's just not enough time to cover complicated topics. As you were saying, local news is at its best when it's covering like something very local and not something very complex.
Yeah.
Unless you're an investigative reporter or something and you get to do a series on it. But if you're just doing a one-stop shop kind of thing, like a one-time deal, if it's complicated, it's highly like you're going to get it wrong. And my biggest gripe with TV news now is that they just should say, hi, thanks for watching your 5 o'clock news. This is best we could do with the couple hours we had today, instead of thanks for watching your most trusted name in news. Like, stop saying you're a trusted name in news. Just say that you gave your reporter 2 hours a day. This is the best they could do. Take it with a grain of salt. Do your research. Then I would be fine. I'd be like, at least you're being honest about where it is. Okay. I know you got to go, Brandi. So a couple more. YO Rockstar. Which King County officials are barring Choe? Always good to know names. Okay. And which journalists have received the royal blessing from the kings of King County? So it's Dow Constantine. It sounds like is mostly the big issue here. Any other answers here?
No, I would say Dow Constantine is the big offender. And then as for which journalists have received the royal blessing, anyone who's not conservative, I think they're probably fine. Even if they're like the Seattle Bike Blog, like welcome in.
Okay. After electing a literal self-proclaimed communist to a position in the Seattle City Council, she was socialist, wasn't she?
Socialist, yeah.
Yeah. And that was, who was it again? What's her name?
Shama
Swan. Yeah. Okay. Is this kind of behavior by the county government even that surprising? That's the first question.
I mean, this all goes back to me something that I talk a lot about, which is the dangers of one party rule. That's the only environment where you can get away with behavior like that, where you have one party that is in charge, has been in charge, is always going to be in charge, at least in Seattle, and also at the state level. When we look at some of the really detrimental policies that they're pushing this legislative session, we've been talking about them on every episode of the podcast. Things like allowing kids to have legal cover from the government to run away to a shelter if they're seeking gender care or an abortion, stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff you can only get away with under one party rule. And so I do think you have politicians like Dow Constantine, who is in his 4th term. He's in his 13th year in office, who feels like, nobody's going to go against me. I mean, I'm not going to get voted out as long as I want to run. So it is the danger of one party rule and the power that we've given a single political party in the state of Washington to our own detriment.
What is the proper relationship between media and politicians?
I think that I have a very cordial relationship with politicians, with the exception of a few like Dow Constantine. Is it friendly? Like, sure. Yeah. I mean, it's not like we go get drinks together, but, I think that you do have politicians who understand that we have a job to do. And sometimes that means that we're going to be critical of them. And sometimes it means I might, as a commentator, support some of the things that they're doing. But, as far as an appropriate relationship, that's hard to define, I guess. I mean, I certainly don't think that relying on them for coverage and access is an appropriate relationship. I think if you find yourself holding back on reporting because you want to make sure that they're always going to pick up the phone, that they're always going to do the interview, that's not an appropriate and that was the approach I always took, like, especially with interviews with the governor, like, I'm going to give this my all, and come what may, if he never speaks to me again, like, that's fine. That's
I mean, it
that's
seems
the risk you have to
abusive
be
if
willing to
you're
take.
it seems like an abusive relationship if you're like, "I really hope they'll still pick up the phone if I'm mean to them," you know?
Yeah, but I mean, I think that that's why you see a lot of really softball questions, or questions
Yeah.
that are couched or softened for that effect. So I think the best relationships are one of mutual respect, where it's like, hey, I have a job to do. I'm going to be honest. I'm going to be
Mhm.
fair, but that doesn't mean I'm going to take it easy on you.
Mhm. Yeah, and they should expect that too. I believe like it should just be part of their expectation that
Right.
that's just what you do.
Yes.
You know what? Sorry, go ahead, Brittany.
No, I was just going to say yes. I mean, that's for politicians. Like, what do you expect?
One of the things that Rakara says here too is about like the, going after adversarial to power, right? People in power going after them, and I think part of the problem is that like power changes depending on where you are, right? And the issue in Seattle is that I think a lot of people are under this impression that the powerful are sort of one kind of people. Uh, when actually in Seattle, it's like the opposite of probably what it is in Alabama or somewhere else, and so when like going back to kind of when Jonathon was fired over that Proud Boys video, if people take another group of folks who maybe like have wrought destruction. Actually, there's a question here about did anyone cover the destruction of Seattle during 2020 Antifa riots? I mean, you could be there are plenty of issues where I feel like the media could give soft or even almost marketing PR type platforms to stories where no one would care because it aligns with
Yeah.
a particular bias, and because they think that that's speaking truth to power. But is it really power in your area, or are you just marketing for the powerful? I mean, I think that's one of the issues in Seattle is that a lot of people have thought they've somehow in their minds they've bought into the idea that they're speaking truth to power when actually all they're doing is they've become the mouthpiece for the powerful. It's very
Well,
easy to think that.
and you bring up a perfect example. Like, I thought Jonathon Choe's Proud Boy, and I've told him this, Proud Boy video was lacking any sort of journalistic criticism of the group. But at the same time, look at CNN in Wisconsin with burning cars behind them and a chyron that says fiery but mostly peaceful. How
Right.
is that any better? It's not. And I would argue it's actually actively worse, because they were gaslighting the public. Jonathon Choe put out a video without commentary or anything, and it was just a video of the group. Could he have offered some critical sort of information on the Proud Boys? Yes. So that you bring up such a good point, which is the left props up unreasonable behavior all the time. And there's no consequences for it. And Jonathon Choe, props up this Proud Boys rally, and I don't think he should have done so, but I don't think it was a fireable offense. And how many times has the Seattle media blatantly ignored the true nature of some of the rioting that's happening? Like any like BLM protests that turned into riots and all that. I mean, you know, I sat my security guard, I'm sure we've maybe talked about the story. I sat behind a potted plant in downtown Seattle while he disarmed rioters who had
Right.
stolen police rifles out of a vehicle. I watched those rifles or those cars lit on fire. My crew was mobbed up at CHOP and had to seek refuge in a fire station. And then when I turn on the freaking 10 o'clock news and they were acting like it was a matter of police aggression, not aggression from the crowd, I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I'm mentally traumatized from what I experienced up there. And you're telling me like this was police violence? So yeah, I mean, the left and the media gets away with downplaying issues on the left all the time. But God forbid you do it for the right. Then you're canceled, you're fired, etc. And the same thing is true, by the way, really quickly, I know I'm rambling, about January 6th. That was a national embarrassment. And for people on the right who defended January 6th, would you have defended it if BLM protesters did the exact same thing? Of course not. But then I took issue with the fact that you had all these Seattle politicians speaking out about January 6th months after they had nothing to say about rioters trying to light our police precinct on fire with officers inside. So it's that kind of moral hypocrisy based on political party that infiltrates society, and it infiltrates the press.
Okay, you did kind of answer the question about covering the riots. You did that. And I don't think it took you didn't lose your job, you quit, to realize
Yeah.
how biased legacy media is. I'll ask Jonathon that when he comes on, or had it started to sink in before then. I think you were onto the game.
Well, I really, what motivated me was a couple things, but the pandemic was a huge factor. Um, I wasn't like a COVID is fake person, but the way I looked at the pandemic was never before in my lifetime, in a lot of our lifetimes, has the government at all levels of government exerted such power over people's lives. The power to decide whether you can make a living that day or not, the power to decide whether you need a shot to keep your job. And so I thought, here you have a free press that is perfectly suited for this moment in time if we take advantage of it. But all I saw was a complete uh, co-signing of everything the government said. And I was really disappointed in my colleagues for that. I had a lot of conversations behind the scenes with even our anchors saying, hey guys, it's not our job to tell people to get the vaccine. All we can do is give them the best information. We can tell them what health officials are saying, but we shouldn't be on air, as some of our anchors were, essentially guilting people who weren't going lockstep with government mandates. And so to me, it wasn't about, oh, I disagree with what the government is doing. It was about, okay, the government is exerting a lot of power over people. We have to make them justify every single thing that they're doing. That's our job. It wasn't happening. And I became borderline disgusted between the pandemic coverage and what happened in 2020, the media coverage of that, with what the corporate media had become in Seattle.
Well, and you work for Fox. That's supposed to be the opposition.
Well, Fox TV is a different entity than Fox News with different sort of management. And so we didn't really see the kind of Fox News bias at play locally. In fact, quite the opposite. I had my show, The Divide, on Sundays. And when our new Fox management came in, it became clear they wanted to make changes to the show that I didn't like. They wanted more editorial control over the show. And that's what ultimately led to, I said no, basically, to the changes and pushed back. They canceled it out of spite. And then I decided behind the scenes that I was going to leave after that November election. So,
Brandi, can you take 2 more questions?
Yeah.
How are you doing on time?
See if it's my, okay. Yeah, I can take 2
I'll
more
read
questions.
them while you
Okay.
can text and I can just talk to myself for a second if you need to send a message. Okay, well, Brisbane was saying because you didn't have official government approved press credentials, if so did other people have to present their credentials, or just wankers who don't like your reporting? My experience in Seattle was like we didn't need a press credential really because they all knew who we were. We were constantly showing up at these outlets, and you have a big camera, and you drive the vehicle. There's ways to know that that person's in the club or not. So it's not like there's a million people or anything showing up, and you got to check credentials. Is that kind of your experience, Brandi?
Yeah, there are really very few places where you need official credentials. One of them is the floor of the state legislature. If you want to get in there behind the wings, you do need to get a press credential for that. I think that's understandable. But there really are very few times where you have to actually show. I mean, credentials are just like something you can photocopy and laminate, and it's just like, oh, this thing has so much power. So that's kind of a old practice.
Did he report on the vaccine injuries that will exclude him in the eyes of government? And does he plan to expose the homeless issue and that government programs actually make the problem worse? I'll ask Jonathon again. He's coming on next Monday, so I'll ask him those. But I don't know if he reported on you were bringing up kind of the lockstep vaccine propaganda that was going out. I don't know if that was part of what he was doing.
Yeah, no, but he definitely believes in the homelessness industrial complex. I used to totally deny that, but I 100% believe that's a thing, that people are getting rich off of our homelessness response. It's the only way to explain hundreds of millions of dollars that haven't resulted in fewer people living on our streets. And so, yeah, Jonathon he is a true believer in the homelessness industrial complex. I'm sure you guys can chat about that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, the Leckners. Allison and Brandi, you both make a great team, bouncing ideas and stories off of each other. I would really love hearing your thoughts once weekly. Okay, well, maybe I'll just, you know what? I just got a new phone. My husband got me. It's got 3 cameras on it. I said, is this NSA, CIA, and FBI? They all get their own camera now. So anyway, I'll just ask him, could you spy on Brandi, get some thoughts from her, and then send it my way so you guys are monitoring both of us. I'm sure we'll be fine. Brandi, thanks again. Any last final thoughts or pitches for where people should follow you, all that good stuff?
Yeah, I mean, we're trying to grow the podcast. We've been doing a lot in the last year. Would love for you guys to become a subscriber. I know like all of us are like, hey, give us $5 a month, and that can really add up. But if you have the extra cash and you'd like to become a subscriber, you can do that on Locals, brandikruse.locals.com, or over on Patreon, patreon.com/ODYSEE. undivided. And we do 3 shows a week, an exclusive show for subscribers on Wednesday, and we're working toward doing it daily. So that's the next goal this spring. And it's very, very fun.
And Brandy's killing it right now with the content. And also, she's getting married in September. So go pitch some in for her wedding fund. I know how expensive those are, even though we did ours really cheap by
Yeah.
forcing our wedding party to hike up a mountain and carry all our crap for us. So that's the best way to do it. But anyway, you can also give Brandy a wedding gift if you want by going to AllisonWinePromo.com.
Oh, yeah.
There's nothing like a high altitude Malbec on your wedding night. I wouldn't know because A, I didn't have them as a sponsor back then, AllisonWinePromo.com, but also because I had no time to eat or drink. And then I started puking around midnight. It was an amazing wedding night, let me tell you. Anyway, you can always support my work by going to AllisonWinePromo.com, 50% off my favorite Malbecs, 50% off shipping, high altitude, all from Argentina, small family operations. And if you're a wine drinker, it's a great way to support my work as well. I really appreciate everybody taking the time to watch. Thanks again, Brandi. Everybody go check her out, support her work, and we will see you next time.